I'm Mark Durden.
I'm David Campbell, and we're curators of the exhibition Double Act, Art and Comedy.
The Double Act refers to the fact that it's on comedy. Double Act has a particular performative tradition within comedy, but also it's two curators, two venues, both here at the Mac and also at the Blue Coat, and also two forms, if you like, art and comedy. So I think it's a good title.
I think Double Act is a useful term because it gives us the opportunity to play differences and similarities between art and comedy. And as the work in the exhibition indicates, there's a wide range of different ways in which people deal with comedy, different artists. It's not a cohesive thing, and it ranges from slapstick to witticisms and everything in between. So it's an opportunity to really explore the idea of what the exhibition might be about art and comedy. We had certain kind of ideas what it might be, but I think we've been surprised by what we've ended up with, and that's part of the enjoyment about working as a kind of collaborative curation as well.
And there's also the double act itself, the idea of a double structure. I mean, one of the works, like Julian Roosevelt, has a double projection, but it plays with the doubling. So there is a theme of the kind of double that recurs to the work, and the idea of comedy as well involves a double act saying one thing meaning another. So there's that double take or double act as a characteristic of jokes and some of the artwork in the exhibition.
We're actually two members of a three-man collaborative group called Common Culture, and this exhibition to some extent emerges from Common Culture's interest in comedy. We've always undertaken our work, which we want to be kind of critical, but also serious, but also comedic. And the idea of comedy is a natural device that we go to. So it seemed like a really interesting way of exploring how other artists deal with that. And quite selfishly, in terms of what that would give to us in terms of the development of our future common culture work. I think one of the things that we were aware of is that not all of the artists in the exhibition self-consciously work in a comedic way. And I think this is one of the challenges and provocations of the exhibition, that like comedy, the art really depends on context. And the idea that we're shifting artists' work, which may not normally be conceived of as comedic, into this kind of framework, opens up a new kind of territory. And yet, at the same time, there are other artists who, for whom the kind of comic is really central. People like Irving Verm, a really kind of successful and prominent artist, produces a wide range of work. We've selected a series of photographs which really play with the idea of how comedy upends conventions, social conventions. And it's almost carnivalesque in the sense that it's raising, drawing attention to the idea of what is expected and then doing something against that for comedic effect. And yet he gives it a kind of title, How to be Politically Incorrect. So there is this sense of, on one hand, comedy is often used to break rules, and I think Irving Verm's is a particular case in point. And some of the other kind of work parodies the idea of what it is to make art as well. So, for example, Michael Smith's video downstairs parodies the careerist ambitions of artists and the promotional packaging of artists, which is kind of inevitably involved in contemporary art these days, as it sits sometimes uncomfortably within the market. So Michael Smith takes on this kind of persona of Mike Smith, and that's a really interesting piece. And then you have people like Paul McCarthy, who parodies certain definitions of artistic practice, like the abstract expressionist painter, which presumably is based upon Wilhelm de Kooning and the notion of an expressionist art practice, and makes it clownish and buffoon-like. So a lot of the art refers not only to the exterior world of social life that everybody has, but a lot of it is based upon references to the art world, so the kind of insider jokes. But hopefully the range of exhibition covers the diversity of that. So there's different points of accessibility, as there is for comedy. I mean, somebody who likes Bernard Manning, for example, will probably not like Stuart Lee, and vice versa. Yet all of them are comedic. So there is a sense of the range of kind of practices that we have. And two artists who traverse both the Blue Coat exhibition and the Mac exhibition are Maurice Doherty and Mel Brimfield. And Maurice Doherty has produced a neon, which is a kind of comedic slight against the idea of curators. And hopefully that is quite an accessible piece, because it kind of plays to the idea that art is elitist and potentially corrupt, and it's about who you know. And here is an artist who's deliberately drawing attention to that in a very playful way, in a very confident way.
Keith Coventry works with particular references that could be seen to collide, kind of references to high modernist form, but also brings that into references to specific to British culture, or aspects of British culture. The kebab that is cast in bronze. So there's kind of play with materials as a sculptor that he uses, using bronze, a kind of traditional medium, to make references to popular cultural forms in Britain. Also the paintings that refer to Russian supremacism through a reference to housing estates. So you've got a kind of social reality that is familiar and popular, played off against the kind of legacy of high art. So in his work there is a kind of double act throughout, and he's quite an important artist here. And the whole aspect that David was saying about comedy is unruly, and our interest in comedy is the unruly aspect. And I suppose thinking about the two exhibitions, one characteristic of this exhibition is a greater emphasis on sculpture, and Olaf Westphalen's snowman sculpture, for example, is unruly as a sculpture in terms of scale, and also in its antagonism to certain assumptions about good taste. So there's that kind of aesthetic provocation, which is the marker of quite a few works here that we like, either in video form but also in sculpture. Slapstick manifests itself very well, I think, in Julian Roosevelt's double projection work, The Stunned Man, which deals and introduces two characters, one who smashes up his apartment and one who's tidy in the apartment. And Julian Roosevelt's talked about this and the influence of Buster Keaton, but also the way in which the character, or the character that plays two characters in the film, maintains a deadpan, does not laugh, does not portray the absurdity of the comedy through an expressive act on his face, maintains the stony face associated with Buster Keaton.
Jonathan Monk is an interesting case in point, because that on one hand has a kind of accessibility through the imagery of the kind of bunny, but it's also, it comes attached with a certain art historical reference, which is to do with Jeff Koons and his kind of famous, expensive sculpture. It's an interesting thing because it's really taken a pop at not only that particular sculpture as a formal thing, because it's in a state of deflation, but by implication there's also deflation of the ego of Jeff Koons. And Jeff Koons is a great person who is able to promote his ego. Does it very, very successfully. So it's interesting that a work like that, which appears to be a material exploration, but is equally to do with the idea that it's something to do with the state that art has as a commodity and value within the wider culture, which is this kind of celebrity culture.
We call that, there's a kind of bathos to that, there's an aspect of deflation there. It's also about Jonathan Monk positioning himself as an artist in relationship to this great super artist that he attempts to deflate. So we quite like it as a work that is antagonistic to a bigger artist, but in a way it's the same time fails. There's also an element of failure in that, not just through the deflation, but I think through the fact that that Jonathan Monk has to make this parasitical art.
Yeah, and that idea of failing has a kind of physical consequence in terms of falling. So one of the other works that we have is Bastionada, which is famously him suspended above a canal in Holland, where he falls into the canal. And that quite simple physical act seems to be quite fundamental to a lot of comedy. You know, that idea that, as it Schadenfreude, that sense of malicious glee that people take in people being caught out or in difficulty or doing poorly. There is that sense of falling is quite fundamental to comedy.
We also think that art is, as we said before, art is quite a serious affair, and as working as artists we're interested in breaking through that, and that actually there's something quite liberational about laughter and introducing laughter into the gallery space, and also crying, because we do have a crying piece as well. We have work by Adrian Paci, video work, where he hires a weeper. Adrian Paci is an Albanian artist and is forced out of his country and to live in relative exile in Milan, in Italy, and he he basically orchestrates his own death and hires a wailer or weeper to mourn his death. So we quite like the joke of having an exhibition about comedy and somebody encounters that work, doesn't watch it to the end as a video, so what's this person weeping and crying? So I just want to introduce that there are other elements that we've played with in this exhibition.
Yeah, because I mean, traditionally the relationship between comedy and tragedy is pretty close.
Yeah.
And yet tragedy is something which is given status, academic status, whereas comedy is seen
as light
and superficial. So the idea that you could have a serious exhibition about comedy with all the kind of provisos that Mark mentioned earlier about dismantling comedy to the point where it's no longer funny. But it's interesting when people are in perilous situations. Comedy is often that kind of release. The joke is the release valve. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of protection, and it's sometimes very, very close to quite tragic things. And we're interested just in those points of connection, to the point where, you go into the Mac to see see a video of somebody weeping as an act of comedy. Well, yeah.
But there is that association that it came across when we were interviewed about something about the light, this association of lightness with comedy. And I think one of the things we'd like both exhibitions to demonstrate is that comedy isn't as straightforward or simple as something that's light. And that, laughter is an emotional response and quite a complicated response to the world, to art. And that's really what we want to provoke through the different kinds of work that we put on exhibition.
And sometimes the best laughter is the laughter that takes you by surprise.